It started with a single email. I was at my desk finishing up a design proposal. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. It was a normal day. A quiet day. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line made me pause. Courtesy notification. Swiss National Bank. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked it open. The words were formal, cold, and precise. Dear Ms. Elara Vance, this is a courtesy notification regarding attempted access to account 7,749. For security purposes, a temporary hold has been placed on the account pending verification. Please contact your private client advisor, Mr. Sterling, at your earliest convenience. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like an icy hand had reached into my chest and squeezed. Account 7,749. I didn't need to look up the number. It was burned into my memory. It was my grandmother's account. Grandma Vivian. It was a secret world she had built. A fortress of numbers that only she and I knew about. It was the inheritance she had promised me. The one thing she said would keep me safe long after she was gone. No one else knows. Elara, she had told me. Her voice a frail whisper in her final days. Not your mother. Not your father. This is for you. This is your start. My hands were shaking as I read the email again. Attempted access. Who would even know where to look? Who would have the nerve? Before I could dial the bank, my phone rang. The screen flashed with a picture of my mother. A smiling, perfectly composed picture from a family vacation years ago. A lifetime ago. I stared at it, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I knew with a certainty that chilled my bones that this was not a coincidence. I answered. Hi, Mom. Elara? Sweetheart, she said. Her voice was bright, cheerful. It was the voice she used when she wanted something or when she was about to deliver bad news, wrapped in a pretty bow. I was just thinking about you. We're having dinner tonight. Just a small family get-together. It's important. I gripped the edge of my desk. What is it? Oh, nothing to worry about now, she chirped. We'll talk tonight. It's just family matters. That phrase, family matters. It was my family's code. It was the gentle warning siren before the storm hit. It was the polite invitation to my own execution. It never meant good news. It never meant we were coming together. It always meant one thing: someone was about to be cut out. And betrayal was being served warm for dinner. And tonight, I knew it was my turn. Walking into my parents' house always felt like stepping onto a perfectly arranged stage. It wasn't a home. Not anymore. It was a showroom. White carpets, glass tables, and art on the walls that was chosen for its investment value, not its beauty. There were no messy piles of books, no scuff marks on the floor, no signs of a life actually being lived. It smelled of lemon polish and quiet money. It was the house I grew up in. but every trace of me had been scrubbed clean years ago. They were all in the dining room, seated around the long mahogany table. The chandelier above cast a cold, bright light on the scene. It was a perfect family portrait, and I was the piece that didn't fit. There was my father, Richard Vance, at the head of the table. He was looking at his wine glass, turning it slowly in his hand, avoiding my eyes. He was a man who had built an empire, but he couldn't look his own daughter in the face. Beside him, my mother smiled, a tight, rehearsed expression. She was the director of this play, making sure everyone hit their marks. And then there was the new family. Lorelei, my father's second wife, sat opposite my mother. She was younger, with a soft voice and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the reason this new family existed. And next to her, smirking like he'd already won a prize, was Caleb, my stepbrother. At 35, he was 10 years older than me, and he had spent every one of those years making sure I knew my place. His perfect wife, Brittany, sat beside him, holding their new baby. The baby was the latest prop, the symbol of their legitimate, deserving family line. I was the outlier, the relic from a previous life my father was trying to forget. Alara, you made it, my mother said, her voice echoing slightly in the silent room. I took the empty seat at the far end of the table, feeling like I was miles away from them all. A maid quietly placed a glass of water in front of me. No one spoke for a moment. The only sound was the clink of silverware as my father nervously adjusted his fork. He cleared his throat. Alara, he began, still looking at the table. We wanted to talk to you about the future. Your grandmother's estate, specifically, my mother added, picking up the thread he had dropped. My hands went cold. I placed them in my lap under the table so they wouldn't see them tremble. I already knew what was coming. The email wasn't a warning. It was the opening shot. This dinner was the announcement of my defeat. Your father and I have been talking with Lorelei and Caleb, my mother continued, gesturing with an elegant hand. And we've all agreed on a new direction. My father finally looked up. His eyes were full of something I couldn't name. Guilt? Pity? Or just the weary look of a man who had made a decision and didn't want to deal with the fallout. We've made some adjustments to the inheritance, he said, the words coming out in a rush. Given Caleb's new family and the baby, we feel it's better placed with them. They have more need for it now. It secures their future, the family's future. The room was silent. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My inheritance. He said it so calmly, like he was talking about reallocating business assets. But it wasn't just money. It was my grandmother's legacy. It was the promise she made me. It was the century-old jewelry. The properties she'd bought with her own money. The portfolio she had built stock by stock. It was everything she had wanted for me, stolen with polite smiles and a quiet dinner. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. I looked from my father's guilty face to my mother's steady one. I looked at Caleb, who was trying to hide a triumphant smirk behind a concerned expression. And I looked at Lorelei, who placed a gentle hand on my father's arm. "You don't need it, Alara," Lorelei said softly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You've done so well for yourself. You're so independent. We're all so proud of you." And that was the final twist of the knife. They weren't just taking it from me. They were using my own life, the one I had built for myself without their help, as the reason I didn't deserve what was mine. They weren't saying I was strong. They were saying I was alone and therefore could be robbed without consequence. A strange calm washed over me. The initial shock, the hot sting of betrayal, it all receded, replaced by a cold, clear focus. I saw them for exactly what they were. Not family. They were pirates dividing up the treasure. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. Then I put it down and smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was a mask. Just a small, polite curve of my lips. Just enough to make them comfortable. To make them think they had won. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for letting me know." My father looked relieved. Caleb's smirk became a genuine smile. They had expected tears, arguments, a scene. They had prepared for a fight. My silence was surrender, and they accepted it greedily. "Well," I said, pushing my chair back slowly, "if that's all decided, I should get going. I have an early start tomorrow." "You're not staying for dinner?" my mother asked, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "No," I said, standing up. "I've lost my appetite." I walked out of the room, my back straight, my head held high. I could feel their eyes on me. They thought I was broken. They thought I was walking away in defeat. They didn't understand. I wasn't surrendering. I was retreating to find a bigger gun. They thought silence meant I had accepted my fate. They had no idea I was just accepting the war. The drive home was a blur. The city lights smeared across my windshield like watercolor paint. My car's interior felt like a vacuum, silent and suffocating. The polite cutting words from the dinner table echoed in my head. "It's better placed with them. You don't need it. Alara. You're independent." Each phrase was a small, sharp stone pelting against my heart. They had disowned me in the quietest way possible, erasing my place in the family with a simple financial decision. I pulled into my apartment's garage and just sat there in the dark, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled. For a moment, I let the full weight of it hit me. The profound loneliness. The shocking realization that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally saw me as an obstacle. A loose end to be tied up and discarded. A part of me wanted to break down, to scream and cry and pound my fists against the dashboard. But another feeling was rising up through the grief. It was a slow, steady burn. It was anger. And beneath the anger, There was a memory. A quiet moment in a sunlit room that smelled of lavender and old books. As I sat in the darkness of my car, the memory came back to me as clear as if it had happened yesterday. Grandma Vivian in her final weeks. She was frail, tucked into a mountain of pillows on her bed, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. They were the same clear blue as mine. She had called me to her side, her hand surprisingly strong as it wrapped around mine. "They're going to try to take it. Elara," she had whispered, her voice thin but firm. "After I'm gone. Your father, he's a weak man. And your mother is ambitious. They will see what is yours, and they will call it theirs." I had tried to shush her. "Grandma, don't talk like that. They love me." She had squeezed my hand tighter, a flicker of frustration in her eyes. "Love has its limits, darling. Especially when money is involved. They love the idea of family, the picture of it. But they are selfish at their core. They always have been. I've seen it for years." Her words had scared me then. I didn't want to believe them. I wanted to believe in the smiling family from the Christmas cards and the birthday parties. But my grandmother knew better. She had always seen through the performance. "They'll try to take everything," she repeated, her gaze intense. "But I've made sure they can't." From the small, carved wooden box on her bedside table, she took out a small, ornate silver key. It was old, with a delicate, intricate design at the top. It felt cool and heavy in my palm as she pressed it into my hand and closed my fingers around it. "Keep this safe, darling," she said. "Don't tell anyone about it. Not a soul. It's for a safe deposit box at my bank in Switzerland. The Swiss account is yours, untouchable by anyone else. And so is the plan that comes with it." I had stared at the key, confused. What plan? A small, sly smile touched her lips. "The contingency plan? Insurance for a day like today. You'll know when it's time. The bank will know. Just remember, Elara, they may think they are clever, but they are playing a game I invented." Now sitting in my car, the memory felt less like a sad goodbye and more like a set of instructions. A battle plan left behind by a brilliant general. The plan was awakening. That email from the bank wasn't just a notification. It was a signal flare. My family had just walked into a trap they didn't even know existed. I finally got out of the car and went up to my apartment. I walked straight to my bedroom, to the heavy antique jewelry box my grandmother had left me. I opened the velvet-lined lid, bypassing the necklaces and bracelets. Tucked away beneath a false bottom was a small compartment. Inside, resting on a bed of faded silk, was the small silver key. I picked it up. It felt different in my hand now. It wasn't just a memento of a lost loved one. It was a weapon. It was power. As I held it, the grief and the hurt didn't disappear, but they crystallized into something else. Determination. They had drawn the line. They had declared war on me, thinking I was unarmed. They thought they were taking from a girl who had nothing. They were about to find out they had just tried to rob the woman who had everything. My grandmother had seen this day coming. She had prepared for it, and she had trusted me to see it through. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was from a sense of purpose so strong it vibrated through my entire body. I wasn't just Grandma Vivian's granddaughter anymore. I was her successor, and school was about to be in session. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I called in, my voice calm and steady, and said I had a family emergency. It wasn't a lie. I then made another call, this one to the number for Mr. Sterling listed in the bank's email. A polite, efficient assistant answered and put me through immediately. Mr. Sterling's voice was calm with a faint European accent. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me. Ms. Vance, he said. I have been expecting your call. We have much to discuss. I am in the city for the week. Would you be able to meet at our local office this morning? An hour later, I was sitting in a sleek, minimalist office on the 50th floor of a glass skyscraper downtown. The view of the city was breathtaking, but I barely noticed it. The room was all quiet confidence and old money. It was a world away from the loud, flashy showroom my parents called a home. This place was silent, serious, and powerful. Mr. Sterling was an older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a dark suit. He had kind eyes, but a firm jaw. He looked like a man who kept secrets for a living and did it very well. He greeted me not with pity, but with a deep professional respect. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Ms. Vance, he said, gesturing for me to sit at a polished conference table. Your grandmother Vivian was a very dear client and a very wise woman. I had the privilege of managing her affairs for over 30 years. He sat opposite me, his hands folded neatly on the table. She was also very strategic. She anticipated a great many things. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression neutral. She told me you would know what to do. A small, sad smile touched his lips. Indeed. Vivian prepared a very specific protocol for a situation exactly like this one. The attempted access on account number 7,749 was the trigger. It set her entire plan into motion. He turned the large monitor on the table so it faced me. On the screen were scanned copies of official-looking documents. They were bank forms, requests for transfer of assets, and legal declarations. And at the bottom of each one, a signature, Vivian Hawthorne. Except it wasn't her signature. I had seen her beautiful flowing handwriting 1,000 times. This was a clumsy, amateurish forgery. Then Mr. Sterling brought up another set of documents, a power of attorney form, granting full control over Vivian Hawthorne's entire estate to a third party. It was dated 2 weeks after her funeral. It was a complete and utter fraud. My breath hitched. And then I saw the names listed on the documents. The names of the people trying to gain control. The names of the people who had submitted these forgeries. Richard Vance, Caleb Vance, Lorelei Vance, my father, my stepbrother, my father's new wife. My mother's name wasn't on the legal forms, but I knew she was the ghost in the machine, the director behind the scenes. Seeing their names there in stark black and white made the betrayal absolute. It was one thing to hear them say the words at a dinner table. It was another to see the cold, hard proof of their conspiracy. The premeditation. The greed. It was uglier than I could have ever imagined. They tried to liquidate everything and transfer it to a new holding company controlled by your stepbrother. Mr. Sterling explained. His voice even. They believed they had successfully taken control of your grandmother's entire portfolio. He looked at me, his eyes full of understanding. She anticipated this, he said again. She knew they would not wait long. She knew they would be clumsy. And she left instructions for you. He reached into a leather briefcase beside his chair and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp of the Hawthorne family crest. An eagle holding a key. My grandmother's handwriting was on the front. For Ilara. He slid it across the polished table to me. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt heavy. Important. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper covered in her elegant script. My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, it means they have finally shown their true selves. I am sorry. My darling. I am sorry for the pain they have caused you and for the hurt you must be feeling right now. I tried to protect you from this. But some things cannot be stopped. Only prepared for. They think you are weak because you are kind. They think you are naive because you are good. They have mistaken your heart for a flaw. They are about to learn what a terrible mistake that was. Grieve for the family you thought you had, my love. But do not grieve for long, because today is the day you stop being their victim and start being their consequence. I have given you all the tools you need. Mr. Sterling will explain everything. This is your legacy now. Not the money. Not the assets. But the strength to protect what is yours. Show them what real power looks like. All my love forever. Grandma Vivian. Tears welled in my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my purse. When I looked up at Mr. Sterling, the sadness inside me had hardened into steel. My grandmother's voice was in my head. Her last words to me, a command. Okay, I said, my voice clear and steady. Explain everything. Mr. Sterling nodded, a look of profound respect on his face. With pleasure. Miss Vance. For the next 2 hours, Mr. Sterling didn't just explain a financial portfolio. He unveiled a fortress. He was like a master architect walking me through the blueprints of an impenetrable castle my grandmother had designed over decades. I sat in stunned silence as he revealed the layers of her genius, each one more brilliant than the last. You must understand, Ms. Vance, he began, turning his monitor back towards me. The Swiss account, 7,749, was never the real prize. It was the bait. It was the front door to the castle, designed to look appealing and just vulnerable enough to tempt thieves. He showed me the account details. It held a significant amount of money, enough to make my family greedy and reckless. But it was a fraction. A tiny piece of the real Hawthorne fortune. Your grandmother structured her entire estate like a web, he continued, pulling up a complex diagram that looked like a corporate flowchart. Every single asset was legally connected to every other asset. And the Swiss account was the keystone. Any fraudulent attempt to access it would not just be blocked. It would trigger a system-wide security protocol. A financial earthquake, so to speak. He walked me through it piece by agonizing piece. First, there were the hidden real estate trusts. My grandmother had quietly acquired properties for 50 years apartments in Paris, a villa on the Italian coast, commercial buildings in New York and London. They were all held in trusts with names that meant nothing to outsiders. Their ownership completely obscured. My family had no idea they even existed. The moment they submitted their forged documents, an automatic legal injunction was filed, freezing any potential sale or transfer of those properties indefinitely. Next were the offshore investments, a vast diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and private equity, all managed through shell corporations in jurisdictions they would never think to look. Your grandmother enjoyed making money, Mr. Sterling said with a wry smile. She was very, very good at it. This part of the fortune was now also frozen, pending a full legal audit triggered by the fraud attempt. They couldn't touch a single dollar. But the final piece, the masterstroke of her plan, was the one that made me gasp. Mr. Sterling pulled up the corporate filings for Vance Enterprises, my father's company, the company that was his entire identity, the source of his pride and their family's lavish lifestyle. He pointed to a section listing the primary shareholders. My father's name was there. Of course. But right below it was the name of a private holding company I'd never heard of. Hawthorne Holdings, LLC. Mr. Sterling said quietly. Over the past 20 years, your grandmother, through various intermediaries, acquired a 40% stake in your father's own company. She became his silent, largest partner. He never knew. That stake makes her, and now you, the controlling shareholder. I stared at the screen, speechless. She owned him. All this time, she had owned the very thing he held most dear. The moment they filed those forged papers, Mr. Sterling explained, a clause in the Hawthorne Holdings charter was activated. It calls for an immediate emergency audit of Vance Enterprises, citing suspected fraudulent activity by its senior executives, namely your father. It also gives you, as the new head of Hawthorne Holdings, the power to freeze all executive compensation, credit lines, and company assets pending the results of that investigation. My grandmother hadn't just built a defense. She had built a trap. A perfect, inescapable trap. And my family had just spent the last 24 hours walking right into the center of it, closing the door and locking it from the inside. They thought they were robbing a house, but they had just tried to rob the bank that owned their mortgage. As Mr. Sterling was explaining the final details, my phone, which I had placed face down on the table, began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then again, and again. It didn't stop. It was a frantic, insistent rhythm. Curiosity got the better of me. I turned it over. The screen was lit up with a storm of notifications. A text from my mother, Ilara. What's happening? My cards were just declined at the store. Call me now. An email from my father. Subject line, urgent. Ilara. The bank just froze our business accounts. They're talking about an audit. Did you say something to someone? We need to talk. Then a string of texts from Caleb, each more frantic than the last. What did you do? My trust fund access is frozen. Brittany's card isn't working. What the hell did you do? Ilara? They were panicking. The earthquake had started, and they could feel the ground shaking beneath their feet. But they had no idea why. They were looking for someone to blame. And they had landed on me, the quiet, independent daughter they had just cut out of their lives. I looked up from the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. Mr. Sterling was watching me, his expression calm. He had seen this before. He was the calm center of the storm he had just helped unleash. As you can see, the system is working perfectly, he said. I looked at the frantic messages on my screen. I saw their panic, their confusion, their entitlement turning to fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was afraid. They were. With a steady hand, I reached down and pressed the button on the side of my phone. The screen went dark. The buzzing stopped. I had silenced them. The rest of that day in Mr. Sterling's office was spent in a blur of legal documents and quiet instructions. I was no longer just Ilara Vance, graphic designer. I was the head of Hawthorne Holdings, the executor of my grandmother's will, and the commander of a financial war machine she had built in secret. The power was dizzying, but the clarity of my purpose was grounding. My grandmother had left me a map, and all I had to do was follow it. The real chaos, however, was happening outside that quiet, air-conditioned office. My family was caught in the earthquake, and the aftershocks were tearing their world apart. That night, I was home trying to eat a salad I had no appetite for when my apartment buzzer shrieked. I checked the security camera. It was Caleb. He was standing on my doorstep, his face red and contorted with fury. He was yelling my name, his voice muffled through the speaker. He buzzed again and again, then started pounding on the door. Ilara, I know you're in there. Open this door right now. What did you do? My heart hammered against my ribs. The old Ilara would have been terrified. She would have cowered, maybe even opened the door to face his anger. But I just stood there watching his frantic image on the small screen. I saw him for what he was, a spoiled child throwing a tantrum because his favorite toy had been taken away. He had no real power. He was just loud. I turned the volume down on the intercom and went back to my salad. Eventually, the pounding stopped. The next day, the ripples spread. I got a call from an old acquaintance who worked in my father's company. Her name was Jessica, and she sounded terrified. "Elara, I don't know who else to call," she whispered into the phone. "It's a nightmare here. They shut down everything. All the corporate cards, the expense accounts. Mr. Vance was trying to close a deal in Singapore, and his card was declined at the hotel. He had to fly back economy. Everyone is panicking. There are men in suits from an auditing firm going through all the files. They're saying the company's assets are frozen pending an investigation into executive fraud. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this, Jessica," I said, my voice calm. "Is it true?" she asked. "What they're whispering about? That your father... that he did something?" "The truth will come out," I said simply, and ended the call. The most satisfying collapse to watch, however, was Lorelai's. Her entire identity was built on my father's wealth and the social status it provided. She was the queen bee of a dozen charity committees. Her life a whirlwind of galas, luncheons, and social climbing. Her power was perception, and her perception was about to shatter. I heard about it from a gossip blog a few days later. Lorelai had been hosting her annual fundraising luncheon for the City Museum at a high-end restaurant. According to the blog, when it came time to pay the $20,000 bill, her black card was declined. And then her platinum card. And then her gold card. One by one. In front of everyone. In front of the women whose approval she lived for. The whispers started immediately. The perfect, wealthy Lorelai Vance couldn't pay for lunch. The story was everywhere by evening. Her social standing evaporated in a single humiliating afternoon. Throughout it all, Mr. Sterling provided quiet, steady updates. The audit at Vance Enterprises has uncovered significant irregularities. Ms. Vance, your father was using company funds to finance his and Lorelai's lifestyle, as well as funding Caleb's failed business ventures. Caleb's primary trust account has been legally frozen. It appears its seed funding came from a fraudulent loan secured against a Hawthorne property he did not own. They are locked out, he told me during one of our calls. They have tried to access every account they knew of. They have tried to leverage every asset they thought they controlled. At every turn, they have been met with a locked door. Your grandmother's contingency plan worked perfectly. They are now, for all intents and purposes, completely powerless. I hung up the phone and walked over to my window, looking out at the city lights. I didn't feel the triumphant joy I thought I would. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of awe. My grandmother had seen every move they would make. She knew their greed, their arrogance, their carelessness. She hadn't just predicted their betrayal. She had mapped it, charted it, and used it as the very blueprint for their own destruction. She really thought of everything. I whispered into the empty room. The pain of their betrayal was still there, a dull ache in my chest. But it was being overshadowed by a growing sense of respect for the woman who had loved me enough to plan for the day my own parents would try to destroy me. She had left me a shield, a sword, and a kingdom to protect. And the time was coming to finally step out from behind the walls and claim it. If this story touches you, please subscribe to the channel and share this video to help me grow and create more content like this. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of quiet, methodical work. While my family's world was publicly imploding, mine was being privately rebuilt. Mr. Sterling and his team worked around the clock. Lawyers filed paperwork. Accountants untangled decades of finances. And power was transferred with the silent stroke of a pen. I spent those weeks in a crash course on my own life. I learned about real estate holdings, stock portfolios, and corporate governance. I learned about the empire my grandmother had built. And I learned that I was stronger and smarter than I had ever given myself credit for. The day finally came. I was not in my small apartment anymore. I was sitting in a large leather chair behind a massive mahogany desk on the top floor of the Vance Enterprises building. It was my father's office. Or rather, it had been. The room had been stripped of his presence. The photos of him with famous golfers were gone. The heavy masculine scent of his cigar smoke had been aired out, replaced by the faint, clean smell of lemon oil and fresh flowers. The only personal item was a single silver-framed photograph on the corner of the desk. It was of my grandmother smiling, her eyes bright with a secret knowledge. A new plaque was being prepared for the door. It would not read Richard Vance, CEO. It would read Hawthorne Holdings, CEO Elara Vance. The name of the company had been changed. A subtle but significant first step. It wasn't his company anymore. It had never truly been. My phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Sterling. All transfers are complete. Legal filings are ready for signature. All assets are secure under your control. Shall we proceed with the family meeting? I looked at my grandmother's picture. Her smile seemed to encourage me. This wasn't just about money. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming a legacy. Yes, I typed back. Send them up. I had Mr. Sterling arrange it. A formal summons. A meeting they could not refuse. I watched from my floor-to-ceiling window as they arrived. Not in their separate luxury cars, but together in a single modest sedan that looked like a rental. They stepped out onto the pavement and looked up at the towering building, their building with the expressions of strangers. When they entered my office, the change was startling. Their confidence, the easy arrogance that had filled the dining room 3 weeks ago, was completely gone. They looked smaller, diminished. My father's expensive suit hung on him like it was a size too big. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale and drawn. My mother's perfect composure had cracked. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands fidgeted nervously with the strap of her purse. Lorelei looked haggard, her soft smile replaced by a thin, tight line of fear. And Caleb. The smirk was gone. It had been wiped clean from his face, replaced by a sullen, resentful glare. He looked like a king who had been overthrown, stripped of his crown and robes, and forced to stand before his conqueror. His wife, Brittany, was with them, holding the baby, looking lost and terrified. They were no longer a portrait of a perfect family. They looked like people who had gambled with God's money and lost spectacularly. They stood clustered together just inside the doorway, hesitating as if they were afraid to step further into the room that had once been the center of their world. I didn't stand up. I remained seated behind the desk, the seat of power, and gestured calmly toward the chairs arranged in front of me. "Please," I said, my voice even and quiet. "Sit down." They shuffled forward and sat. A silent, broken family. The great and powerful Vances brought low by a forged signature and a grandmother who had planned for the worst. The meeting was about to begin. And, for the first time, I was the one at the head of the table. The silence in the office was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the city far below. They sat stiffly in their chairs, avoiding my eyes, looking at the floor, the walls, anywhere but at me. They were waiting for me to yell, to cry, to accuse them. They were waiting for the emotional outburst I had denied them at the dinner table. I was not going to give it to them. Emotion was a currency they no longer deserved from me. I let the silence stretch out, letting them sit in their discomfort. Finally, I leaned forward slightly, my hands folded on the polished surface of the desk. "Let's discuss fraud, shall we?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. My father flinched as if I'd struck him. He fumbled for words. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice raspy. "Alara, we can explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted, my tone cutting and precise. "The forged documents? The false power of attorney you filed 2 weeks after my grandmother's funeral? The attempted illegal transfer of assets from the Swiss account? Which part would you like to explain first?" "Dad." From a folder on my desk, I pulled out a stack of papers. I stood up and walked around the desk, laying them out on the large conference table between us. One by one, the sound of each sheet hitting the wood was like a gavel striking down. "This," I said, tapping the first document, "is the forged signature on the Swiss bank forms. Our handwriting expert identified it as yours. Caleb. A clumsy attempt." Caleb's face went white. "This," I continued, laying down another, "is the fraudulent power of attorney signed by you, Dad, as the primary executor, and you, Lorelei, as a witness to a crime." I laid out the bank statements showing the attempted transfers, the company deeds, the corporate filings, a mountain of paper that documented their greed in cold, hard print. Proof undeniable and absolute. Their entire conspiracy laid bare on the table. They stared at the evidence, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. They had been caught utterly and completely. I returned to my seat behind the desk. As of this morning, I said, resuming my calm, business-like tone, I am the controlling shareholder of this company. I am the sole legal heir to the entirety of the Vivian Hawthorne estate. And you, I looked at each of them in turn, are perpetrators of felony bank fraud, wire fraud, and forgery. My mother finally spoke, her voice a strained whisper. What are you going to do? I've been discussing that with my lawyers, I said, and we've come up with two options for you. I want you to listen very carefully. I held up one finger. Option 1, I press charges. I hand this entire file over to the district attorney. Given the mountain of evidence, you will all be prosecuted. You will lose everything you have left. The houses, the cars, whatever money you have squirreled away, it will all be seized. You will face prison time. The Vance name will be associated with scandal and crime for generations. Your lives as you know them will be over. A small choked sound came from Brittany. Lorelei reached out and put a hand on her arm, her own face ashen. I held up a second finger. Option 2, I said, my voice dropping even lower. You sign confessions. Full, detailed confessions of everything you did. You, Dad, will sign your immediate resignation as CEO. You, Caleb, will sign away any and all claims to any family assets, now and in the future. You will all sign a non-disclosure agreement, promising to never speak of this to anyone, ever again. In exchange, I will not press charges. I will provide you with a modest allowance, enough to live on quietly and without luxury. You will disappear from public life. You will give up the name, the company, the legacy you tried to steal. The room was deathly quiet. They were processing the totality of their defeat. They had nothing left to bargain with. Lorelei was the one to find her voice, her eyes pleading. And the baby, she whispered, gesturing to her grandson. What about him? I looked at the child, sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, oblivious to the destruction his family had wrought. For the first time, a flicker of real emotion crossed my face. Not anger, pity. He will be fine, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. I have already created a separate protected trust for him. It will pay for his education and his future. It is in my name, and it will be managed by my people. He will be taken care of. But you, I looked directly at Lorelei. Then Caleb will never touch a single dollar of it. The choice was on the table. Prison and public shame, or exile in quiet obscurity. There was no third option. My father was the first to break. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, the sound of a man completely and utterly defeated. He looked old, not just tired, but ancient, as if the weight of his actions had aged him a decade in a matter of minutes. He picked up the pen Mr. Sterling had so thoughtfully placed on the table. His hand shook, but he signed. One by one, they followed. Caleb signed with a barely concealed rage, his jaw tight, his signature a vicious slash of ink across the page. Lorelei signed with tears silently streaming down her face. My mother was the last. She looked at me, her eyes searching for something. Pity. Forgiveness. A sign of the daughter she used to know. She found none. Her hand was steady as she signed her name. A final act of capitulation. Pen after pen scratched across the papers. Their signatures were the sound of an empire crumbling. In a single meeting, in less than an hour, everything they had built, everything they had stolen, was gone. It was all just ink on paper. When the last document was signed, Mr. Sterling's assistant, a quiet, efficient woman, came in and gathered the folder. She nodded at me once, then left the room. It was over. They stood up to leave, moving like sleepwalkers. They were ghosts in the room that had once been the center of their universe. As they reached the doorway, my mother paused. She turned back to look at me, still sitting behind the massive desk. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely audible. How long was this in motion? I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. Truly looked at her for the last time. "Years," I said, and my voice was not triumphant, just factual. "Grandma saw who you were long before I did." The words hit her harder than any shout could have. It was the truth, and it was devastating. She had been seen, understood, and outmaneuvered by the woman whose legacy she had tried to erase. She turned without another word and followed the others out. I watched them go down the hall until they were out of sight. I listened to the faint ding of the elevator that would carry them down and out of my life forever. Outside my window, I could see their small rental car drive away. Slower, smaller, stripped of the arrogance that once filled every driveway they parked in. A moment later, a notification appeared on my computer screen. It was a secure message from Mr. Sterling. All documents secured and filed. The transition is complete. Shall we begin the charitable foundation? A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in weeks. The war was over. The cleanup was done. Now the real work could begin. "Yes," I replied. "Let's build something worth inheriting." That evening, the office was quiet. The army of lawyers and accountants had gone home. The city lights twinkled below me. A sea of a million stories. A million lives. My own story had reached a turning point I could never have imagined. I walked over to the desk and picked up the silver-framed photo of my grandmother. I looked at her radiant smile, her knowing eyes that seemed to see right through time. She had fought a battle for me before I even knew I was at war. She had given me more than an inheritance. She had given me a chance to become the person she always knew I could be. You were right, I whispered to the photograph, my voice soft in the stillness of the room. The real fortune wasn't the money. It was the foresight. It was the wisdom to see people for who they were. It was the strength to prepare for the worst while still hoping for the best. It was the love to build a fortress around someone, not to trap them, but to protect them until they were strong enough to command it themselves. On the desk, I thought about the woman who had packed a suitcase in the middle of the night and the woman who was standing here now. They were the same person, but they were also completely different. For so many years, my life had been about them, their drama, their needs, their chaos. I had defined myself by my role in their lives. The savior, the provider, the strong one. Now standing here with nothing but the sound of the sea for company, I felt the vast empty space where all that obligation used to be. And it wasn't empty at all. It was filled with peace. The waves whispered against the rocks, a sound that has existed for millions of years and will exist for millions more. It was a sound that knew nothing of debt or family or guilt. I took a deep breath of the salty air and whispered back into the wind. You can't lose what finally set you free. There were no tears. There was no lingering guilt. There was only the powerful, steady sound of the sea and the quiet, unshakable freedom that doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. I opened the front door before they had a chance to ring the bell. Come in, I said. They walked inside, their steps hesitant on the polished concrete floors. Their eyes darted everywhere, taking in the open-plan living space, the huge fireplace, the original artwork on the walls, the vast lake visible through the wall of glass. Their awe was palpable, and underneath it, I could smell something else, the scent of greed. Their minds were already racing, calculating, reevaluating my worth to them. Eleanor, my mother said, her voice breathy. This house? Where did all this come from? I've been fortunate in my work, I said simply, leading them to the living room. I did not offer them a tour. I did not offer them drinks. This was not a social gathering. It was a final board meeting. They sat uncomfortably on the low, modern sofa. They looked small and out of place. For a few minutes, they tried to lecture me. My father took the lead, his voice attempting its usual booming authority, but it was hollow in the high-ceilinged room. Eleanor, we are here because we are worried, he began. What you did to Victoria was cruel and unnecessary. Families are supposed to support each other, to forgive each other. Money, he gestured vaguely at the house. My mother chimed in. Your sister made a mistake. She was under a lot of pressure at work. You have to find it in your heart to forgive her and to help her. She lost her job because of you. They spoke for 10 minutes. I let them. I listened quietly as they told me about forgiveness, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds of family. I listened to all the beautiful words they had never once put into practice. When they were finished, a heavy silence fell. They looked at me expecting an apology, expecting me to break down, to promise to make everything right, to restore the comfortable order of their world. Instead, I reached for a thin folder I had placed on the coffee table. I opened it. "I agree," I said, my voice calm and clear. "We should settle things." I looked directly at my younger sister. "Isabella, let's start with the family trust. The one Grandpa Arthur set up for our education." Isabella shifted nervously. "What about it?" "I did a full audit last week," I said. "I found some interesting invoices. For example, several from a company called Art Supplies Unlimited over the past 2 years, totaling over $30,000. The strange thing is, according to state business records, Art Supplies Unlimited doesn't exist." I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of a forged invoice. "You've been stealing from the family, Isabella, for 2 years. You've been siphoning money that was meant for all of us." Isabella's charming smile vanished. Her face went pale, then blotchy red. She looked at our parents for help, but they were staring at her in stunned, horrified silence. The darling of the family was a common thief. I then turned my gaze to my parents. "You want to talk about family? About support? For 40 years. You have treated me like a piece of furniture. You celebrated Victoria's ambition and Isabella's charm. And you ignored me because I was quiet. You taught me that my worth in this family was based on how little space I took up. You didn't build a family. You built a hierarchy based on your own preferences." I looked at all three of them, their faces a mixture of shock, shame, and disbelief. "This isn't a family," I said, my voice steady and final. "It's a failed business. It's bankrupt. Morally bankrupt. And I'm liquidating my shares." I stood up. They remained seated, frozen on the couch. "That means I'm done. I'm withdrawing my time, my energy, and my love. The accounts are closed." I turned and walked away toward the large glass windows overlooking the lake. I didn't tell them to leave. I didn't need to. The meeting was over. Their presence in my house, in my life, was over. I listened as moments later I heard the sound of the front door opening and then closing for the last time. Months later, the sunlight was warm on the back of my neck. I pressed my hands into the rich, dark soil, firming it around the base of a young maple tree. The air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. In the distance, I could hear the sound of children's laughter drifting through the crisp autumn air. I was in the Higgins and Arthur Memorial Garden. It was a small public park, a patch of green and quiet in the middle of the city. I had bought the derelict lot it stood on and funded its creation. There were flower beds and benches, a small playground, and a community reading circle. It was named for the two people who had in their own ways, given me my freedom. Mrs. Higgins, whose simple need for kindness had been my breaking point, and Grandpa Arthur, who had given me the key to unlock my own life. Mrs. Higgins was sitting on a bench near the playground, reading a story to a group of neighborhood children. She was warm and safe, her new furnace long since installed, her winters now comfortable. After her landlord had tried to evict her, I had bought her building, lowered the rents for all the elderly tenants, and funded a proper maintenance program. It was a small thing, really, a footnote in the Orion Fund's portfolio, but it felt more real than any billion-dollar acquisition. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a news alert. Apex Financial Group announces record quarter, following major restructuring. Michael Ross had kept his job. The bank had survived. My paused withdrawal had forced them to clean house, to trim the fat, to actually pay attention to their culture. They were stronger for it. I never heard from Victoria again. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to another state, taking a much lower-level job at a small credit union. Isabella had quietly paid back the money she had stolen. My parents sent a single, stiff letter asking for a reconciliation, which I never answered. They were ghosts from a former life. The transfer of $4.2 billion was the loudest thing I had ever done. But it wasn't my greatest act. The real act of power, the one that truly changed my life, was the quiet withdrawal of my love and my loyalty from people who had bankrupted my spirit. I had spent a lifetime making deposits into a family account that gave me nothing in return. Closing it was the single most profitable transaction I ever made. I stood up and brushed the dirt from my hands, looking at the small, hopeful maple tree. It would grow tall here. It would be seen. I looked out at the peaceful garden, at the smiling faces, and felt a sense of quiet contentment that no amount of money could ever buy. If you've ever been mocked for being small, if you've ever been made to feel invisible, remember this. Silence isn't weakness. It's leverage. Like, comment, and subscribe because the best revenge is quiet freedom.